Well, good afternoon. Oh, wait a minute. Good morning. Oh, wait a minute. Happy Sunday. No, 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 no. Happy Monday. Dr. B, have you gone off your rocker? What is going on here? And the answer is I'm talking with Noella Mackenzie, Dr. Noella Mackenzie from Australia. And she's in Australia where it's happily Monday morning. And I'm here in the middle of the US where it's right in the evening hours of Sunday. So here we go. To tell you, just to give you a little go here, let me try doing a share. Let's see if I can do that right. She's going to be talking about this book, Understanding and Supporting Young Writers from Birth to Six, among other things. So I'll stop my share now. And she's going to be telling us all about herself. I'll do a little bit of that right now. She's an associate professor, School of Education, Charles Sturt University. Her research focuses on teachers and learning, teaching multimodal text writing. Uh, I was admonished that I should have a I love writing cap as well. I might have to get that ready for my next conference so that I have one of those as well. She's worked in California, in Canada, study trips to Finland, Scotland, New Zealand, and she was a teacher leader for reading recovery for a number of years. So quite a background there. Presented keynotes in conferences as far afield as Iceland, and I'll give her a chance to tell a story about Tim Shanahan because he was also a keynote at one of those same conferences. And she's co-edited 3 books, numerous invited chapters, many a published paper, just amazing background. So I've done way too much talking. It's time for me to turn things over to you and ask you to tell us a little bit about your background and especially both academic and well, academic teaching, personal, and I know we're going to find out a little bit about Australia in all this. So I need to change things over here. Um, well, here we go. And it's all you. You're on.
Thanks, Sam. It's wonderful to be here on Sunday evening in your part of the world and Monday morning in my part of the world. Um, and thank you for the kind introduction and the invitation. If you can see the maps that are on the screen at the moment, you'll notice I've included 3 different ones. The one on the left-hand corner shows the Aboriginal countries in Australia, with an arrow pointing to Wiradjuri country, which is the country that I live in and am also privileged to work within. We traditionally acknowledge the elders, past and present, when we do presentations, and acknowledge the country that we sit upon. You'll also see another map of Australia, a more traditional map, below the Indigenous map, and then a large map of New South Wales showing exactly where Albury is. It's actually on the border between Victoria and New South Wales. So if you travel from Sydney through to Melbourne, which a lot of Americans do when they visit, you actually would drive through or fly over Albury. So that's a little bit about where I'm from. But a bit more to my background, I'm a farmer's daughter and I grew up on a farm in regional New South Wales. And my brother and I were the first 2 from our family to study at university level. So, my dad left school at 14 to work on the farm. And that background is strongly influential even today. My mother is now 98
Oh
and
my.
she's been an amazing role model for me. I started out as a teacher in different schools in New South Wales and the ACT, and was privileged enough to be able to teach all grades between kindergarten and grade six. And I know in America, people often specialise in a particular grade, but in Australia, we're often a little bit more diverse than that. And so I've had the privilege of teaching 5-year-olds right through to 12-year-olds. And at each level, I've learned more. My academic career didn't start until I was 48. And that's when I graduated with my doctorate. And just serendipitous, a position came up that was literacy with an early childhood focus. And it was at a local university. And so at 48, I switched from being full-time in schools and school systems to working at the university.
Okay.
Again, a
If
real
I could ask you for
privilege.
a second to switch off the share now so that we can see you. We're
Oh,
actually
sure.
seeing the map. There we go. All
Okay.
right, perfect. Now more about you now. Go ahead.
No, I think you've heard enough about me. I
Oh,
was going to move to the book, unless you have a question, Sam. I think.
well, actually, I have a question. Tell us about the book. There we
Good.
go.
Well, that was going to be my next slide. So I think you've already shown the cover of the book, but I will talk a little bit about how it came about and then show the image again. Janet Scull, who's the other editor, and I had both come from similar backgrounds in that we both worked in schools and school systems, but then we both moved into roles with reading recovery. And so we had that strong common understanding of literacy learning from reading recovery. But now we were both working as academics and we both had an interest in writing. And so we started conducting some research together. And we also started looking for texts that would be useful to use with our undergraduates in our separate universities, but also with the teachers that we'd been working with. And we were kind of surprised to find that the books about writing were actually really very limited. There were lots about reading and there was some about writing, but we wanted to look at that early learning, starting right from the get-go. Right from, I use an image of one of my grandchildren who is about 7 months old, but you can see how bright-eyed and alert he is. And I've argued that right then they are noticing what the people around them are doing. So if they see people around them writing or drawing, they will know that that's part of what they do. Just like we read them books, so that books will become part of what they do. So we decided we'd put together a proposal and we were successful with that proposal. And then we thought, well, do we write this book ourselves? We've got a lot of background, a lot of experience. And then we both said almost at the same time, but we know people who know more about specific elements of writing than we do. And so I'll talk about the unique nature of our authors, our collaborators, in a moment. But it's a comprehensive text in that someone working in preschool can pick it up. Someone who's working in early, very early childhood care can look at it, because there's a chapter on preschoolers, but there's a chapter on 0 to 3s. And then we move through the school perspective, and we've got some quite focused chapters in there that are amazing. Now, the first edition of this book came out in 2018, and was because it was so well received that we were invited to do this new edition. And I'll share again. and show you, if I can do this. This is a little tricky going back and forth, isn't it?
It is.
Um,
There we go.
it's this one here. So you can see down in the middle there, that's the first edition. It had a white cover, but it had the same graphic and it had different children. We have four wonderful reviewers who have supported this particular book, which we're very proud of. And I'm sure there's some names you'll recognise there, Sam, with Deborah Wells
Absolutely.
Rowe, Deborah Mile, Judy Parr, and Peter Afflerbach. So we were very privileged to have support from those people. But just having a quick look at the contents page, because I think that's quite interesting to see the range of uh, chapters that you can see. And as I said, there's, birth to two, preschool. There's a chapter on authorial skills that's got a particular focus on text construction, sentence construction, and vocabulary development. There's also one on spelling in this 0 to 8 range, handwriting and keyboarding, assessment, which is a really tough one for writing, for teachers, teaching writing, some really strong strategies that I've written about here with Marion Nicolazzo, who's now working at Melbourne University, but at the time was working in the classroom. Draw, Talk, Write, Share is a pedagogical approach that comes from a specific research project of my own. And then we've got multimodality in digital spaces with Lisa Curvin and Jessica Mante from Wollongong. And we've got a wonderful chapter on plurilingualism, which I always find hard to say, with Paul Molyneux. And then we've got a lovely chapter on when learning to write isn't easy. So I think you can see there's a lot of reasons why this book is quite unique, Sam, and quite specific. And interestingly, if I refer to one of the reviewers that when the publishers were deciding whether they would invite us to do a second edition, they sent it out to reviewers, and a couple of people who reviewed the book hadn't seen it before. And their comments were, why does it need to be updated? We love it the way it is. But from our perspective, it gave us the chance to revisit, to respond to comments from teachers. It also gave us a chance in the introductory chapter to acknowledge COVID and the impact of COVID. And it gave us a chance to freshen up all of the chapters. And in the case of the Draw, Talk, Write, Share chapter, that was a new chapter that was added because of requests from teachers. So does that give us a sense of the uniqueness, Sam?
Absolutely. And I think that it's giving me that idea of what's unique about your book, what teachers of writing might expect to find in your book. And before I jump to the next topic that I want to discuss, which is the SOR, I want to give you one chance here to say something about my audience, my teachers, are mainly teachers, and they're looking for something they can use on Monday. So, are there some things they could use on Monday that they would find in your book?
There absolutely are. And I can, now this is where we'll get a little bit complex. Can I take you to my website?
I think you can if you do a share screen. If you go to your website first and then go to the share
Okay.
screen,
Oh,
I
I've got to
think
go
you
to the
can do that.
website first. All right.
Let's pray now to the
Which means I've
technology
got to
gods.
stop sharing.
Optioning that and open up your website and share that.
I need to close that. Open up the website. Okay.
And once you're on
And
the
now,
website, if you hit share there, that should bring us to your website.
but I seem to have lost. Oh, there it is. Share on the website. And there.
There we are.
Okay.
There we
Okay,
are.
this website is it's easy to find if you spell my name correctly. If you go to the home page, I'll go back to the home page. This is what the home page looks like, Sam. And this is where you'll actually find the 6 posts that I wrote with Martina Tassoni on reading quite recently, that were published as a series of 6 posts in an Australian national blog. But if we go to resources over here, you'll see that on this particular page, this has come from when Janet and I were looking for a way of analysing children's writing. We wanted to have something that was going to acknowledge the complexity of writing in terms of text structure, sentence structure, vocabulary, as well as spelling, punctuation, and handwriting. Because we acknowledge the fact that for many teachers, this process of analysis was really quite difficult. And so we developed this particular tool to use for our research, but we kept taking it back to teachers to get their comments and their support. We use teachers right throughout our research development, and there are research papers written about this research and process, Sam, that I can share with you if that's something you'd like to be able to
Absolutely.
access.
I'll make sure that links to that, you've already shared some things, and I'll make sure that links to that are available on request.
Okay, fantastic.
Thanks to AI these days, I have to be careful about putting too many links in the actual written blog itself. But
yes,
I'll create a request page for that.
Yeah, and even if we just provide the references and they find the references themselves,
okay. So,
that would be okay. What I wanted to point out with this is that what we've got here is a continuum from the least sophisticated through to the most sophisticated examples that we found in our research when we were looking at year 1. Now, for a classroom teacher, they can actually use this tool, and it's interactive. If I click on here, you get an example of a piece of writing in terms, in this example, it's in terms of spelling. If I go down here in terms of vocabulary, and the descriptor says uses familiar common words, etc., and then you click and you've got an example of what that looks like. And we can go over here and have a look at punctuation and find an example of punctuation being used. There are papers that explain this, and there are links on here, but the tool itself, if you want something you can use to examine children's writing and analyse them in a way that is demonstrating an understanding of the complexity of children's writing, I think you'll find it's a useful tool.
Well, I'll say this. Not only will they have something to use on Monday, but Monday after Monday after Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, for the entire year. This is just amazing. And this is all available just directly on your website, correct?
On my website, free of charge.
Oh, music to my ears.
I think it's music to most people's ears, Sam. And if I go back to the website itself, and I take you to my blog archive. My blog is not nearly as sophisticated as yours, Sam, but what you'll find is also a description of a process that I've developed through one of my other research projects called Draw, Talk, Write, Share, which is a pedagogical approach. There's a whole chapter on it in the book, but there is a taster for people here on the website that again is free of charge. but it gives a bit of an idea of what this is about. It's a process of recognizing what children know and can do when they start school, that notion of drawing and talking, and that becomes the basis for then adding writing. So we're encouraging children to create multimodal texts right from the beginning of kindergarten, rather than saying, you haven't got time to draw, you haven't got time to talk, let's get in and learn this writing. The reverse is, I'd like you to draw me a picture, talk to me about your picture, I will teach you how to add some labels to your picture, and then we will move to using those labels to write a sentence. So that process is also described here quite extensively. So they've got that they can use on Monday as well, Sam. And if they start exploring my blog archive, they'll even find more processes that they can use. I've got a chapter here or a blog post here called Big School is Different, Ideas for the First 5 Weeks of School with Kindergarten.
Oh, this is just all amazing. Okay. Well, I think if we haven't tweaked their interest by now, we're not going to. But I rather think we have more than tweaked their interest. I want to get into a slightly different topic now, and that is the entire thing of science of reading, SOR, and where uh, writing fits into all this and the SOR agenda. So if you take a few minutes to give us your thoughts about that, and I know that's somewhat controversial, but on the other hand, um, we've long known, those of us in this business, of the importance of the reading writing connection. So it's all you.
I have a very strong belief in that reading writing connection, Sam. The reciprocity between the two, as far as I'm concerned, they're inseparable. And I've often argued that every writing lesson is also a reading lesson, because you cannot write without reading. So I'm very a strong believer in that process. I also noticed, as a reading recovery teacher leader, that my teachers who taught writing well, their children seemed to be stronger more generally when they were discontinued from reading recovery. So I think the writing requires us to look at the detail in print in a way that reading doesn't always. For example, you and I have been writing words for a very long time. We've both got very, interesting colour hair. And that tells me that some words we might have written millions of times in our lives. But if we want to write that word again tomorrow, we have to write every single letter. There's no shortcut. If we want to write read, we have to write an R, an E, an A, and a D. Whereas if we looked at that word, we might glance across it quite briefly. So I believe that encoding is a side of the process that teaches children a lot about the detail of print. And I think it's ignored by the phonics people quite often. They're very much about decoding and going from letter to sound, when my feeling is that going from sound to letter is often more powerful. Now, you asked me about science of reading. I'm not avoiding it, but it's a topic that is rife, and it's why I've written about it, and people can read more of what I've written via my website. But it's interesting. I think people's views are softening. I think we're getting some more interesting openness about the arguments. Now, if I look at my favourite definition about the science of reading, It involves the science of reading with the small s and the small r, and it would be the International Literacy Association's definition, which talks about it being basically a massive, continuously growing digital library. You know, every day there's probably more articles about research that are going into this massive digital library, which with technology we have the privilege to be able to access easily. So to me, that's what the science of reading is all about. It's a term that's been used for hundreds of years. It's not new, but it's that wonderful source of research. The capital S-O, capital R, has taken on a life of its own. And it's sometimes used to talk about narrow views of reading and reading instruction. But more recently, I think we've got, I listened to Tim Shanahan speak a couple of weeks ago at a conference. He gave a wonderful presentation and he talked very openly about not being committed to any form of any particular phonics program or even any particular order of what letters come first. He talked about how decodables were useful for a very short time. His presentation was very helpful. And I think the other researcher you alluded to, and I think you're wanting me to talk about the velocity and Tim
Escape velocity.
Seidenberg.
Yeah, Seidenberg and his idea of escape velocity.
Escape velocity. I actually love that term. But to me, and I guess it's my reading recovery background, it immediately took me back to Clay and her notion of a self-extending system. And I actually,
I'll just jump right in here and say you're not at all the only person to notice that. Susan Vincent, among others, has written extensively about that. So, and my shtick is let's find common ground, and it would seem that that seems to be happening to some extent.
that's what I'm thinking too, Sam. I'm actually feeling very positive. But the other thing that I think is interesting, I had to do the closing keynote at the conference that Tim Shanahan spoke at in Australia a couple of weeks ago. And so I was listening very carefully to all the different keynotes and I ducked into a number of the other presentations. And what I found was I didn't hear the term science of reading once in a 2-day conference on reading. Now, that is an interesting thing for us to think more about. I'm not sure what sort of message it's giving, but I think it's maybe a something for another time.
I often end with the term "dare to dream." Uh, Perhaps
Dare
we
to
will
dream.
find, yeah.
Well, hopefully I've answered most of the questions that you wanted to know about, Sam. Is there anything else you'd like me to add?
Well, actually, that was the question I was going to ask you. Before we close things out, is there any uh, topic that you'd like to talk about? I guess the one thing, and you've more than alluded to it, is the idea of this writing being encoding, and that is definitely a way to teach phonics. And interestingly enough, one of my colleagues here on this side of the pond has what she now calls um, print, a speech to print rather than print to speech approach, and she's written a whole round of things around that. So I guess the final question here um, is the kind of encoding that uh, writers do useful or helpful in the reading process?
Absolutely, and totally. I feel that teachers, and we didn't really talk about this too much, but teachers find writing hard. And that's understandable because of its complexity. if you think about that, it's physical, but it's cognitive. We use our hands in a way, either with a pencil or a keyboard. We are engaged in authorial and secretarial or transcription skills. It's multidimensional, and that makes it difficult in terms of teaching. The other thing I'd say is that teachers, most teachers will tell you they're readers, but when you ask them if they're writers, you get a very different answer. Very few of them see themselves as writers. And so their level of confidence in teaching writing is not as strong as it is often in their teaching of reading. Writing's also messy. It requires an instructional process that is complex. So teachers tell me quite openly, if there's disruptions to my program, or there's an extra assembly or something happens, I never forget my phonics lesson and I never forget my reading lesson, but sometimes writing falls off the table. And what I would ask teachers to remember is that writing and reading work together. So if you're going to miss something, don't miss writing, because writing includes your phonics lesson, because when they're encoding, they are going from speech to speech to print. And they're also engaging in reading, because you must read as you write. So a writing lesson is also a phonics lesson and a reading lesson. So don't leave writing out. Make sure it's included, and you will get lots of bang for your buck.